Well, good morning, everyone, and we'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners, and thanks for doing that welcome this morning. I think the lady has left, but it is an important thing to do in your role, to think about what you might be able to do to support practical reconciliation or any form of reconciliation. It is incumbent upon all of us to give thought to that, I think. Steve, wanted to thank you very much for your kind remarks. You've done a great job in coordinating the resources of this industry and coordinating for impact to ensure that you could have an impact. And over the past 12 months, we have created a process which you have taken full advantage of. And I wanted to thank you for your personal leadership. I'm not sure when you sleep, but you do look pretty good, I've got to say, for a guy that doesn't sleep. And the way that you've engaged with your members, I think, has been outstanding. So we wouldn't have been able to achieve any of these things we're talking about today, about policy and regulation, without you. So thank you very much, and thank you to the members of Blockchain Australia. Now, I think this time last year I came to this conference. I know it's not a conference. What is it? It's a week. And I threw the speech away. But this year I'm going to. I won't bore you too much, but I will read through parts of this speech. So. It was this time last year that I proposed that we would extend the terms of the Senate Committee on FinTech and RegTech. Now, at the time I said, when we first applied our investigative lens to the digital asset sector, we expected that it would become one of many exciting developments in Australia. But it has become clear that blockchain and its attendant fields of digital assets and cryptocurrency is an altogether different challenge for policymakers. Now, since that time, in April, we formally reconstituted the committee after some internal misgivings, I must say. And there were people who said, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to hang out with drug dealers and everyone else? But I always had the strongest possible personal support from the Treasurer. He always thought it was something that was important to investigate, and then subsequently he has backed it in. But in April, we formally got the committee extended for 6 months. And then in May till June, you probably recall, we took submissions. So we took 100 submissions from the community. And then in August and September, we conducted public hearings. So we heard from about 80 or 90 people. So, I would say to you as a parliamentarian that the whole process of being in Parliament, much of it is quite degrading. The way that the chambers conduct themselves, the pantomime of question time and all that stuff is a huge waste and destruction of taxpayer funds, and it doesn't deliver anything for the community. But what has been a revelation in the past 51 years has been the innovation. Well, it wasn't our innovation, but we stole it from the United States, like our Constitution, was the establishment of the Senate committees. Because the Senate committees have the capacity to go into a community and listen to people and take advice, written submissions, have public hearings, have proper engagement, and then develop a formula for policy. And that is exactly what we tried to do with this particular inquiry. We got your ideas on paper, we talked to you about them, and then we fashioned them into some sort of recommendation set. In October, we passed down the final report, which was largely bipartisan. So 12 recommendations, and in the main, they have now been adopted. December 8 was a big day. It was a day that the Treasurer announced a formal commitment to the recommendations and a timetable for implementation. And I would say that we are getting on with this job like no other, because it is true that government can be slow. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. But I think on this front, in terms of the detailed statement that was made in December and then the timetable that's been set out to address a lot of it in this year, we have already provided a down payment on that today with the announcement of there'll be 4 separate things happening today. There'll be the Board of Tax review, terms of reference. There'll be the Council of Financial Regulators terms of reference on debanking, and there'll also be consultation papers released on markets and custody. So that is a significant down payment. So that is an opportunity for you to have your say again on these very important matters, on debanking, on taxation, on market design and on custody. So few people would have believed that we could deliver a substantive inquiry, have it adopted by the Cabinet and announced, and then have key parts of it outlined for consultation by the Treasury Department in advance of the election. I know many people were concerned that the election would happen and we wouldn't have been able to put more meat on the bones. But I think it was very important that we signalled to you, the market, the members of Blockchain Australia, friends, associates, perhaps enemies, that we were serious about this, that we wanted to make sure that we bedded down as much of this as we could. And I've spoken to many people in this room, and I understand how anxious many people have been about putting meat on the bones on the December statement. Having said all that, we are, and you will know better than me, we are now really well placed as a jurisdiction. We've got a lot of policy, we've got a lot of detail out there. There's no question that we need to back it in with legislation, and that is what I want to briefly speak to you about today. Now, many of you know that I'm not a very serious person, but I do need to address this serious matter of the current conflict in the Ukraine, because there is some implication here for the sector. As you know, without proper measures, crypto could become a loophole in international sanctions. Some of the most nefarious actors in the world could benefit, and it needs to be addressed. The removal of Russia from SWIFT and the sanctioning of the Russian central bank has given this fresh urgency. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has triggered unprecedented financial sanctions. In addition to the conventional sanctions applied to governments, businesses and targeted persons, including the Magnitsky reforms, these sanctions have also applied to central banks. Russia's foreign exchange reserves are now largely frozen. And while this has been going on, cryptocurrency transactions have been allowed to occur unsanctioned. According to the Australian Computer Society, at one point, the volume of high-value daily cryptocurrency transactions worth more than US $100,000 was worth $16 billion when Western countries cut Russia from SWIFT, and it quadrupled to US $64 billion just 2 days later. It is possible that Russian entities are using cryptocurrency to exchange currency, and we can't have a situation where a product which is used by millions of people can become a backdoor for sanctions. When individuals, businesses, investment funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, including the Future Fund, are being compelled to divest from Russian assets, it doesn't make sense to allow the back door to remain open. I have engaged formally with Austrac to ascertain what we can do to ensure cryptocurrency doesn't become a backdoor under the current minimalist digital currency exchange regime. Their view is not much can be done under the DCE system, which is more fodder for our reforms to be implemented as soon as possible. The reality is we don't live in a libertarian nirvana. We cannot have regulatory arbitrage. To get on with the reforms, at the end of January, I convened a series of roundtables to nail down the final details. Almost 60 people came to the table. Industry leaders, peak body reps, lawyers, academics, entrepreneurs, representatives from the Treasury and the Board of Tax. We examined recommendations on market licensing, custody, DAOs, debanking, tax and tokens. And we now have that next level of detail. Across these roundtables, there has been strong agreement about the need to address the matter of law design as a key matter of public interest. And this means addressing the issue wholeheartedly and comprehensively. And the proposal that I'd like to put on the table today is that we should have a very simple, clear and clean Digital Services Act, because bundling things into the Corporations Act, which is a very lengthy and sometimes confusing piece of law, could actually undermine our ambition to become a crypto hub. And I would say that many foreign lawyers would find it almost unreadable in parts. And so that's why I think we should seriously consider, as part of the law design and law reform, a Digital Services Act, to be guided by 4 key principles: technology neutrality, broad flexible principles, not a prescribed code, regulation by a minister, not bureaucratic agencies, and within government having the cooperation and appropriate powers, resourcing and personnel. This will show that Australia is open for business and things, as I say, are clear and clean. It will build on the work of Peter Verwa AO, the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Global Talent Attraction and Business. Mr. Verwa has been leading the Global Australia Task Force, a whole-of-nation initiative and a partnership between the Department of Home Affairs, Austrade, Prime Minister and Cabinet, Treasury, DFAT, state and territory governments. I encourage you to have a look at the suite of initiatives at globalaustralia.gov.au. I also want to briefly touch on decentralised autonomous organisations. The committee recommended that DAOs be brought under the fold of the Corporations Act, providing for standards of corporate governance and corporate personality. DAOs could replace companies. It might be the most significant development since the first joint stock companies were floated on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange some 400 years ago. It is possible this could cause mass tax leakage. Australia is the most exposed in the OECD to corporate taxation. Corporate taxation accounted for 17.1% of Commonwealth revenue in 2020-2021, which is nearly double the OECD average. Our reliance on company tax has been unsustainable for some time. The 2020-21 intergenerational report shows we have major challenges facing the budget in the years ahead. And so we can't afford to have our tax base disrupted. I want to set out some key principles for DAOs. There should be a responsible person within the jurisdiction. There should be a consumer protection framework which distinguishes between wholesale and retail. There should be standards for audit, assurance and disclosure. There should be a clear statement about limited liability. And there should be consideration given to replaceable rules. All of these things should be discussed with a lot of industry input. But there seems to be a clear consensus within the industry that there should be more prescription for DAOs than less. On tax and tokens, you know that tax reform in our country is hard. I'm sure it's hard in every jurisdiction. The GST took 20 years to achieve, and generations of politicians were defeated in the attempt. We now have a situation where a broader tax mix which may be politically impossible, and so we need to be prepared to make targeted changes to our tax system where we can. If we don't make tax changes for cryptocurrency purposes, we may as well go home and forget about the whole thing, because unless you are competitive on taxation, you cannot be a serious hub. And you can have the best regulation in the world, but if you are tax uncompetitive, then it is not going to work. I've never been afraid of saying that we should be dynamic in terms of regulation, and we shouldn't be afraid to look at the Isle of Man or the Bahamas or any of these tax havens for inspiration on regulation. Doesn't mean we should copy their tax policies. Doesn't mean we need to. It is a balance of having a dynamic regulatory environment, but also being prepared to have a tax system which is going to be competitive. And people like me will have to make the case in the public square that a tax cut in this space is appropriate if it is going to ensure that there's going to be more people doing business in this country and employing more Australians. So I'm not afraid of arguing for radical tax changes to ensure that we are not inadvertently taxing transactions that we shouldn't be, but better still, trying to get a system where we are becoming viewed as a jurisdiction that people want to do business in, because our tax system is clear and clean, just as our regulatory environment is clear and clean. The Board of Tax is going to take a broad approach here. The Senate committee recommended an examination of CGT. The Board of Tax will do a broader, once-in-a-generation review of digital assets And I think that is appropriate. And given the issues that have been raised by the industry, I'm sure you'll support that. So in summary, and I haven't read much of this speech, to be honest, I did want to say a few things. The first is we are very committed to hearing from you on these 4 processes. You now have 4 more opportunities to have your say. There'll be a lot of paper that is going to be released, and if you don't like everything, that's fine. I mean, the whole point of this exercise is to put something down on paper that you can pull apart. I think you know that we are very keen to work very closely with you, and I think that you've shown enormous maturity in recognising that the day for regulation has come. And as Steve has said, you have had a mainstreaming moment. And I remind you that having crossed that Rubicon, you need to go the whole way. And law reform is going to be difficult. It always is. No one wants to see how the sausage is made, and now you're going to find out. But it is going to be difficult, and compromises will need to be made. And the more that you can coalesce around Blockchain Australia in its recommendations to government and the Parliament about how things should be assembled, that will be for the best. You won't get absolutely everything you want. And when you're regulating in a new industry that hasn't had a lot of regulation, there will be some businesses that are affected negatively, others will be affected positively. And that's how it will have to be. That's how it will roll. What we will try and do is to design these laws in a way that doesn't damage new entrants, doesn't damage prospects for innovation. And so you should be prepared to engage more heavily with us than you ever have been. As I say, 4 processes, very exciting, I think. And the Treasurer has made good on his commitment from December. I know that many of you will be relieved that this is happening now. So I just wanted to thank you for your time and commitment to this important reform agenda. And most importantly, I wanted to thank you for deciding to invest here and not going offshore and committing to this country, because we have a lot going for us. And I won't sell the country to you, but you know that there is a lot of good things that are happening here, and this is the missing piece. The regulation is the missing piece. We're committed to doing it. And thank you for your commitment to Australia and for employing so many people. Okay. Well done.
Thanks, Senator. And I think just reflecting on that before I introduce Caroline, industry wants to have that conversation. So the message for us visibly is when it comes to government and regulators, we don't like being told we're consulting with industry, because then I ask, are we being consulted with? So, you know, on the record for us, we want to be consulted more. We want these things to happen in plain sight, because it's no point we're being accused of doing things behind closed doors. Someone else does something behind closed doors. So an open dialogue is exactly what we're after. Introducing up Carolyn Bowler, CEO of BTC Markets, who will ask the Senator a few questions. No greater and stronger advocate in the industry. You know, Caroline is almost in more places than I am, I think, unfortunately for you, always telling people about you know, what the industry is and what the opportunity looks like. So Caroline, I'll welcome you to stage.
I hope this works. Oh, it does. It's working. Excellent. First of all, thank you very much for that speech. That was fantastic.
Well, I'm not sure it was, actually, to be honest. But it was a... yeah, I mean, I'm never sure what I'm going to say, to be honest. I sort of make it up as I go along.
Good, me too. That's exactly what I'm about to do.
Really?
So this works out well.
It's much more fun that way. I mean, there's so many boring speeches, and I always think you can tell how boring it is based on how many people are asleep. And, you know, people fall asleep so readily. It's actually quite amazing.
On that note, we'll move on. So it was 11 months ago, and we sat pretty much on these seats, and I turned to you and I said, regulate me. And here we are 11 months later, and you're holding good on that promise. So thank you very much, I think, from all of us in the industry for your commitment and the commitment of the committee to get us to this point. I think one of the questions that everybody wants to kind of ask is, given the amount of negativity out there around cryptocurrency, what was it for you that moved the dial?
Well, I probably make light of it, but I did endure a lot of negative commentary in Canberra and around Canberra about, of all the issues to talk about, why would I be talking about this? And look, I went into it with genuinely an open mind. I wasn't sure whether it would be good or bad. I thought it might be good. And the more I looked at it, the more I saw the opportunity. But also, I guess the big pull for me was the risk of not doing something. And I'd had a heavy amount of exposure to financial regulation, and my background is in financial services. And I saw a lot of parallels with basically this idea that Australia had wanted to be a hub for asset management, right? And this is for people I know lots of people have financial backgrounds here will know this, right? For 50 years we've been talking about we want to be an asset management hub. And the reality is it hasn't happened. I mean, if you look at the asset management sector today, I mean, 96% of the assets under management are domestic and largely from super. And the reason that hasn't happened is because we never got the changes. We never got the tax changes. We never got the regulatory changes. Mark Johnson did a review in 2009 for the Labor government, very good review, which said, here's all the things you need to do to become an asset management hub. And we passed one of the key changes like last year, this year. Anyway, I've almost
That
finished.
doesn't give us much hope, though.
No, so, I mean, I had the scars from that. So I thought, look, this is a very strong parallel here. We could be a hub on this, and this would be easier to do than the other thing, because all you've got to do is pass a few laws. And so from my point of view, it was a risk of not acting, seeing all these businesses disappear to Singapore and the UK. And so I looked at it through a risk management lens and looking at it through the battle scars lens. And I thought, well, the more I looked at it, the more I saw the opportunity. And that's why when we drafted the report the way we did, we just tried to make 6 or 7 recommendations on crypto that would be easy to adopt and then do the work. The last point on that is the reason we lost a lot of the arguments on the Australia as an asset management centre is because it sounded like it was sort of like, a tax cut for a cigar chomping, fob watch wearing, top hat wearing kind of guy,
Just like crypto.
Well, I just think, crypto is so different. It's much sexier, much more dynamic, and much easier to sell. And I'm a Liberal senator, right? I mean, I'm interested in how we can help small business and enterprise. I'm desperate to ensure that we're not there to serve the interests of the major institutions. I'm just desperate to make sure we get that disruption happening. And so I just thought, look, these are great concepts, and we can sell this. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, it's a good answer, though. I mean, it's a real answer. And I think that for a lot of us in the industry who constantly get pushed up against these same narratives, the same negative narratives, implying as though there's an amount of irresponsibility within the industry, and that it's flatly not the case. It clearly isn't. And it can be quite challenging. So I think it's quite the oasis then to come up against politicians who have embraced it, or at least gone to the effort. And I think certainly the work that your committee did, they certainly did the hard yards and very quickly. And kind of on that same note, the regulation that came out of Europe and the regulation that's come out of Australia, I think is quite forward-looking, quite forward-facing rather, quite embracing of innovation and very open to change, which is excellent. And I compare that then to the language used in the executive order from President Biden. And the language there talked about, I'm just saying if I got it right, responsible innovation, which to me feels like quite a loaded term in the same vein as the negativity that we have to face. What's your view there, not necessarily to pull apart President Biden's EO, but what's your view there about that kind of perception of responsible innovation? Because, I mean, I'm sure for a lot of us here, we'd like to know if we're acting irresponsibly in what we're doing. What's your view?
Well, it's not for the government to say what's responsible, what's not responsible innovation. I mean, that's if you look at the statement from Frydenberg in December and you look at the Biden statement from, was it this month? I mean, we're way ahead of them theoretically. The challenge is, can we deliver on our commitments? That's the challenge for us. Can we legislate our promises? And that's why I think today is so important, because today shows that we are on track to do that, and we are, I mean, compared to other, I'm not sure whether people have had much experience hanging out with government. I mean, it's lots of fun, a really good time. But this is like lightning. This is like lightning. But the answer to your question is, look, I wouldn't use that term. What we will do here is set out the framework as the Parliament for how the laws should look on, something like a market, right? And it'll be a capital requirement, there'll be a fit and proper person test, whatever. I mean, that's what we will do, and then it's up to the market then to determine what products it wants to host. And we've got to be really upfront about this. And this is why I like what Joe Longo said. And I've been very critical of ASIC in various ways in the past, but you've got to give it to Longo for saying, look, if you do your shirt, you do your shirt. I mean, it's really important that the government doesn't try and legislate away risk. I mean, not all risk is bad. And that's why these ideas of having compensation schemes of last resort and the like, you've got to be very careful with them. And I support the way that the Treasurer has ensured that the compensation scheme of last resort is narrow. Because if there was a great big net the government was holding underneath the industry, I mean, you wouldn't have an industry.
On that note, I'll move the topic just slightly to the left of that and talk about NFTs.
Go right,
oh, sorry. No comment. But let's talk then about NFTs. I think actually you're probably the first politician I've seen in the West anyway who has embraced NFTs to the same degree. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project with Joan and how did that come about? Because that's really fun.
Well, I just thought it was fun. I quite like the look of it actually. Well, I mean, we just thought it would be a good idea because I was opening an NFT gallery here in Sydney, which is quite amazing. I'm not sure. Has anyone been to it? I know this is terrible for the online audience, but I've just asked people in person if they've been. And it's a whole bunch of screens inside this gallery in Bondi. And it's quite a you can just see that this is how it's going to be in the future. All of Andy Warhol stuff on screens. And we just thought it was a good idea to commission one for the opening of that particular gallery to show how supportive we are. I mean, I'm really interested in this idea of opening up opportunities for Indigenous artists, particularly in remote Australia, and addressing some of those issues that they've had to face around provenance. I think it's very exciting because if you think about Australian art, and you walk into any Australian consulate or high commission anywhere in the world, I mean, you're going to see an Aboriginal dot painting. That's what you're going to see. So we have a vested interest as a country to get this right, and I think it could be very, very exciting. So, I mean, for a whole lot of reasons, I'm very excited about that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I've got Steve making rude hand gestures at me, so that means our time is up.
It's a universal symbol for we're already running over time. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Senator, for your time today. We appreciate it and the leadership, and we'll carry that conversation forward in the months to come in the trenches.